Hi, everyone. We'll get started in about a minute. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. And if people join in a bit later, they can just jump in with us. So welcome to our June webinar on safe routes to school and policy, why and how to develop policies to support safe routes to school. This is a part of our webinar series we've been doing for the Safe Routes to School Colorado program in partnership with CDOT. So thank you all for being here, and we're happy to have you all and talk a bit about safe routes to school and policy today. So my name is Kori Johnson. I'm with the Safe Routes Partnership, and Michelle Lieberman, also from Safe Routes Partnership, is joining us today, along with Lisa Diaz, who's the Safe Routes to School Administrator for the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Safe Routes Partnership, our mission is to advance safe walking and rolling to and from schools and in everyday life, improving the health and well-being of people of all races, income levels, and abilities, and building healthy, thriving communities for everyone. And as I mentioned today, I'm one of the presenters today, along with Michelle and Lisa. So a few housekeeping items before we kick off the content for today. So to the left is the GoToWebinar viewer, through which you can see the presentation, and to the right is the control panel where you can raise your hand, ask questions, and select the audio mode that you will use. And you can either join in through phone or through computer audio today. If you have a question, there's a little question box at the bottom of the control panel. So feel free to jump in and ask questions, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the session. And for today's agenda, we'll be talking all about safe routes to school and policies. So we'll start off a bit talking about why policy is important, and then move on to talking about city and county policies, followed by a policy highlight from Denver. Then we'll go into some school district policies, and then finish up with a Q&A and some reminders and next steps. So to kick us off, why policy? Why is policy so important? So in general, policies are binding and enforceable, and they apply widely within whatever jurisdiction where they're passed. So policy is important because it's a statement in writing that is binding, and it can set out a general approach to be applied broadly across a jurisdiction. There are all different kinds of policies for safe routes to school, from school board policies to local state laws, resolutions, zoning language, contracts. You all might be familiar with like other types of policies in your lives outside of safe routes to school, but policies are an important way to help institutionalize programs and get that binding statement in writing. So when creating policies, there are usually lots of different stakeholders in the room. This is just a short list of people who might be involved in policy making, or on these days on a call, so they might not be in a room, but you might be in a Zoom meeting or Google Meetup group. So when policies are developed, it's really important that to look in the room and make sure that you have a diversity of thought, a diversity of opinion, and make a concerted effort to have a diverse range of perspectives and listen to people who will be most impacted by these decisions. So, you know, state and local officials, city, county officials, nonprofit partners, community members, planners, transportation personnel, public health workers, lawyers, parents, students. And again, as the policies are being created, thinking about who will be most impacted and who is not in the room, making a concerted effort to involve people who might not be in the room. To involve them in the process is really important. And benefits of policy change. Policy can institutionalize good ideas, reach more people, lead to more consistent implementation, create accountability and enforcement, and establish relationships and responsibilities. So, you know, as we're working to create policies, these are some of the things that you can think about. And also, we can kind of talk to you about policies versus programs. So programs like in walking school bus can lead to policies that support walking and rolling. So the walking school bus is the actual program, and then having that program up and running can lead to a policy that supports a walking and biking. You know, walking and biking, maybe it's more, you know, allocated funds for walking, biking programs or staff times. It can support a new policy for having, you know, like more students involved in programming and increase the number of students for walking and biking. So that's just the way that programs can also impact policy. And for safe routes to school, there are a bunch of different policy levels from the federal level all the way down to the school level. So in today's session, we'll talk a bit about some of these different policy levels. And to get started, we will start talking about our city and county policies and how those affect safe routes to school programs. So I'll hand it over to Michelle.
Great, thanks, Kori. Let me get my screen up and running. There we go. All right, so like Kori said, today we're going to talk about city or county policies as well as school district policies. And why do we talk about both of these levels? And why do we talk about safe routes to school in both of these policy areas? Mainly because the safe routes to school may be focused on the trip to school, but the trip that happens is happening on streets that are usually designed, built, and maintained by local governments. And more collaboration is really required for a comprehensive, successful safe routes to school program than for a lot of other initiatives. And they require both of the support of school districts and local jurisdictions to be successful. So we really want to talk about policy opportunities for both. Both school districts and local governments have their own geographical authority. They have needs and they act on the areas in their jurisdiction. They both use data to inform policy and program needs. They have different perspectives, both the perspectives of the schools, the students and parents, the local planners and engineers who oversee the roads, et cetera. And then there's also access to different resources. There's different pots of money, different resources in terms of expertise and staff time and community partners that school districts have from cities and counties. So we really want to talk about ways to support both of those through policy opportunities. So I'm going to start by talking about some city and county policy options. We can look at incorporating safe routes to school into the comprehensive plan. There could be a standalone safe routes to school resolution. And then there's also opportunities to incorporate safe routes to school into other plans and policies as well. So I'll go a bit into each of these. None of these is necessarily inherently better than the other. And in an ideal world, a city or county will take advantage of all of these policy opportunities to include safe routes to school so that safe routes to school doesn't live in just one place. This encourages more collaboration and integration that we know safe routes to school needs to be successful. So starting with the comprehensive plan, if you're not familiar with comprehensive plans, they really are the blueprint for the future of a community. It's a written document that starts with the residents' vision for how they want the community to look and feel in the future and the place that they want it to be. So it builds off of current community conditions and details specific goals, objectives, policies, and action steps to realize that vision. So in Colorado, each city has a comprehensive plan. It might also be called a master plan or by some other name. There's a number of different sections in which safe routes to school can be included in the comprehensive plan. First of all is within the vision. This is where there's usually a statement about how community residents want their community to evolve. So there's an opportunity to include in the vision a vision for walking and rolling generally, as well as walking and rolling to school and other destinations in the community. There's also opportunities to include safe routes to school in the elements or the chapters or the topical chapters of the comprehensive plan. So these could be within public facilities, transportation, land use, et cetera. So I'll share a couple of options for those. We often see safe routes to school included in the transportation or circulation element or chapter. Some communities will use this as a place to identify specific steps or policies to reduce speed near schools through lowering speed limits or through design changes. There's also the opportunity to prioritize infrastructure investments through policy here, or to fill in the gaps around school routes, or to set a policy that has a commitment for local funding for safe routes to school. The other chapter element of a comprehensive plan where it's pretty important to see safe routes to school included is the public facilities element. And this is typically the chapter where a local jurisdiction sets out how it's going to work with a school district. So how it's going to coordinate on things like walking and biking events, how it's going to coordinate on a crossing guard program. And then also the location of development and context of services, which includes access to schools, recreation centers, other community facilities as well. Also an opportunity to include safe routes to school within the land use element. School locations are really important long-term decisions, and while cities usually don't have just decision-making power over where the schools are located, cities can work with the districts to develop policies in the land use elements that respond to current and future school locations. So some examples might be emphasizing the importance of infill development near schools, so that way they're within a walkable distance, and also calling for zoning updates that support connectivity and good walking and biking infrastructure. In Colorado, the recreation and tourism element is a required element of the comprehensive plan. So there can be, coordinated efforts for safety and encouragement of safe routes to school that are tied to, routes that may be through parks or on trails, and co-locating parks, so that way they are located near schools and can really support each other as community destinations. So one example of a city in Colorado that's included safe routes to school pretty intensively within the comprehensive plan is Fort Collins. Showing a screenshot here of a couple of the pages from the Fort Collins city plan. And their comprehensive plan calls out principles and policies in their transportation chapter, specifically related to safe routes to school. These include policies around connected bicycle facilities, safe pedestrian facilities, infrastructure for all ages and abilities, and a very specific policy indicating support for continuing the Safe Routes to School program. So this creates a really solidified commitment for Safe Routes to School within the city's long-term plan and vision for the community. If you're interested in delving in more to specific language or specific examples around including Safe Routes to School within comprehensive plans, we have a number of resources that Kori will send out, including some model language and best practices as well. So another option, what if you have Safe Routes to School in your comprehensive plan, but you want something extra to emphasize the commitment? Or if your comprehensive plan, which is kind of a big document and a long process to develop, if it's not being updated soon and you want to see something more immediate, one option to look at is a standalone Safe Routes to School resolution. Cities and counties can adopt this a standalone policy, typically in the form of a city council, commission, or board resolution. A strong policy sets out specific actions the city or county will implement, and it can include support for safe routes to school events, actions that can be taken by the local agencies, commitment to revising existing policies to improve their support for safe routes to school, or even a funding commitment for safe routes to school. So beyond the comprehensive plan and the standalone policy, it's really important to, as I said, to integrate safe routes to school into other plans and policies. There are a number of other plans and policies where a city or county could include language supporting or committing to safe routes to school. These include a safe school zone policy, complete streets policy, bicycle or pedestrian plans, Vision Zero policies or plans, and cities' zoning and subdivision codes. So I'll quickly go through each of these. Similar to a Safe Routes to School standalone resolution, a Safe Routes to School or Safe Zones policy focuses on the area around the schools. It could include reducing speed limits, putting in traffic calming features to get drivers to slow down, and prioritizing new walking and biking infrastructure near schools. Complete streets policy you might be familiar with. These are policies that ensure all new construction and renovation of streets create streets that are safe, comfortable, and convenient for everyone using them, including drivers as well as people walking and biking. So this really benefits the entire community, and within Safe Routes to School policies and the plans that come out of it, a city could include schools, students, and families as specific groups to coordinate with it, and also call out as specific users. Bicycle and pedestrian plans are a common place that we often see, safe routes to school. These plans could be incorporated into a transportation plan or a comprehensive plan, or really just be standalone plans. And they set out the goals and policies and actions that a city is going to take related to walking and biking programs and infrastructure. So this can include safe routes to school, both generally as a means to support walking and biking to school, as well as there could be specific actions or policies within that plan, specifically around the commitment to safe routes to school. Zoning and subdivision codes, these often follow up to a comprehensive plan. Updates to these do, and so including safe routes to school and comprehensive plan could trickle down into making sure that walking and biking is reflected as modes of travels in the city's zoning and subdivision code that really governs how the community is developed. Ideas to amending a zoning code include requiring bike racks in new commercial development, requiring parking behind buildings and pedestrian-oriented corridors, incentivizing, letting developers build more units more densely, or have fewer parking spaces in exchange for desirable features such as corridors connecting through an interior of a block, or public open space, or transit facilities that could support safe routes to school. And so some zoning and subdivision codes can be written to restrict things like auto repair places near schools that have a lot of cars coming in and out, but also create pollution, things that we want to keep away from the school, immediate school area. And then last policy or plan opportunity I'll talk about today is Vision Zero. And Vision Zero is an effort to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries by a certain date, and it's very data-driven. So safe routes to school can be included in Vision Zero by prioritizing children as vulnerable users and identifying schools as key destinations. It can be a place to identify safe routes to school investments to protect those vulnerable users and identify along those routes for the schools as a key destination. And we've also seen Vision Zero policies include bicycle and pedestrian safety elements in education that could also specify children and safe routes to school within that. With that, we're going to turn it over to Lisa to talk about some specific policy work that has been done in Denver.
Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Wonderful. So thank you, Kori and Michelle, for the introduction and the opportunity to discuss how we're incorporating equity as a policy in our Safe Routes to School work at the City and County of Denver. As Kori mentioned, I'm on a small team that administers Denver's Safe Routes to School program at the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, which we also call DOTI, D-O-T-I. In January, I and a few other team members focused on active transportation were moved from the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, also called DDPHE, over to DOTI, and DOTI's executive team formed the Office of Community and Business Engagement, where I work now. So this was really a good recognition of the intersection of public health and the built environment, while also recognizing the need to focus on engaging our community around DOTI projects, programs, and safety initiatives. I'm going to share how we're organizing to deliver equitable and effective engagement with Safe Routes to School as an example. So this is an image of a map in Denver from 1938 from the Denver Public Library. It was a city-produced map that authorized the unethical practice referred to as redlining. As you likely know, redlining generally refers to the practice of withholding home loan funds from neighborhoods considered to be poor economic risks. When the United States government created the Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, to assist in the refinancing of mortgages during the Depression, the agency used assessors to rate the desirability of neighborhoods. It's really hard to read this because I'm very distressed by these policies back in the day, but I'm just stating facts here. The red areas on this map show where Denver leaders redlined what they believed were neighborhoods considered to be that poor economic risk. Most people recognize that the determination was based on race and ethnicity, a dark moment in our nation's history that has had long-lasting effects on our residents. The city's leadership has a lot of work to do to reverse the effects of redlining, and we're working on it. Just to clarify the definition of equity, it's when everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from, has the opportunity to thrive. At the City and County of Denver, equity is recognized today as a policy starting at the top. And that's really important when you have your executive level people recognizing that and making that part of your policy. Here are some examples on the slide of how equity is part of our lowercase p policy in our work today. I'm omitting the full history of equity in Denver because that's another conversation that requires more than 15 minutes. Even our city plans emphasize equity too. We have a lot of work to right the ship from 1938. In our Safe Routes to School work, a small team of 2, and with leadership support, departmental and interdepartmental and external partnerships, we support nearly 300 public and private schools in the City and County of Denver. We cannot equally or equitably support that many schools with the resources available, so we needed some data-driven methods to assess neighborhoods and communities to assess where the greatest needs existed. We're also building a Safe Routes to School action plan now with a team of partners, stakeholders, and consultants that's also tied to our Vision Zero action plan, which also ties to our comprehensive plan. When Denver became a Vision Zero city a few years ago, the challenge of assessing need became even more apparent. Our city is and was growing, and that meant traffic volumes increased, resulting in more congestion, more crashes, and unfortunately more motor vehicle-related fatalities. Equity index scoring was designed at first to inform our neighborhood health assessments at DDPHE with 5 indicators, creating a community of concern score, and that was an internal name. Since then, the scoring was expanded for use at first to identify equity areas for Vision Zero support, and later became a tool for prioritizing transportation and development projects. The Denver Safe Routes to School team uses this scoring tool to identify cohorts that benefit the most from equitable Safe Routes to School support. And the next slides explain how the scoring is calculated. So put on your nerd hats for a moment, and I'm going to share how we built that equity index score. Our data team recognized the variables listed on this slide as determinants of equity in our neighborhoods. Each variable or indicator is weighted based on the level of influence that variable has on our output model. There are 11 variables modeled into a GIS overlay to identify needs across the city. Data from the 2017 ACS American Community Survey was used to create block groups and census tract data. Each block group and tract were ranked with a score from 0 to 5 based on the value groupings defined using the natural breaks method. If you multiply each score by the weight that you see on this slide, you get maps that are right next to those indicators which describe each variable geographically. The result is this map you see here when you put it all together. The red and orange areas on the map have the highest equity index scores and convey the greatest need based on the variables. The green areas have the lowest scores and the lowest need, but that does not mean that the green areas have no need. Safety is an issue being addressed citywide with the resources available. And again, with limited resources, we have to choose where to commit the greatest support. And here you can see what we often refer to in Denver as the upside down L when discussing equity. So remember that slide that I showed you earlier, and it showed the redlining map from 1938. I've placed it on the left. I hope it's visible. It kind of faded out a little bit, but I placed it over a current present day map of Denver so you can see how our city has grown. Now look at the equity index map created with the 2017 data on the right. As you can see, most of the areas that were red in 1938 are red on today's equity index map. So we're still seeing the effects of redlining from 1938. And as I'll show you in a moment, most of our motor vehicle crashes and crashes resulting in serious bodily injuries or fatalities occur in the red areas, as I'm about to show you. So this slide shows a map of our equity index score and the crash locations in school zones and outside of school zones collected since 2012. The white to dark brown areas is the equity index map you saw on the previous page. On the streets are green to red marks indicating documented crashes in school zones, and the pink to burgundy marks, and I know they're very hard to see, but it's more important that you get the whole big picture of this, are documented crashes that resulted in serious bodily injuries or fatalities regardless of them being in a school zone. Note that the prevalence of crashes in the high equity scoring areas, that upside down L, compared to the low equity index scoring areas. So hazards are affected by that original redlining area from 1938. But we also have to recognize that people are more than data. Data informs our work, and it tells us that there's more to the onion than the outside peel. So for example, some redline neighborhoods are no longer red in the equity index map. What happened? What's the history? Was it gentrification? If so, are there original residents who may not feel they have a voice when we have community meetings? How do we include them? How do we reach them? What about the neighborhoods that stayed red? What is their history? What are the cultures of the residents in each area that affect their stories? With each neighborhood having a different history, we need to understand that story in order to respond and support equitably. Is there a group that never attends community meetings? Why? Is it the time of day, the need for childcare? Is it accessible for them? What are the barriers? Scores and data are only the beginning of the story. So while using data to inform our work and assess need, given that equity in our work is a Denver policy that comes from the top, our engagement in data helps to understand that need and help to understand the culture and the history so we can be more successful in this work. How we engage influences our ability to successfully do so. So when we engage with our residents on Safe Routes to School support, we take that data and incorporate that human component to understand and relate. We listen, we're honest, we never overcommit or overdeliver, we learn the history, and we care. And we try to understand what it's like to be them and find solutions that work and remain honest. And we also explain why when the answer is no, because sometimes those are hard discussions that we have to have as well. And of course, we meet when it's convenient for our customers and provide childcare and interpretation services. At our Office of Community and Business Engagement, we call OCBE, our engagement process considers the form of engagement that both accomplishes our goals and considers what's most important with community needs to ensure voices can be heard equitably and with honesty and transparency. So the top headers on this illustration cover different phases of the engagement spectrum, which you may have seen before, which includes a range from a mostly tell or inform level on the left, all the way to the right to a more empowered and partnership conversation form of engagement. All levels have a purpose, as you can see in this diagram, where examples for Safe Routes to School are shown. And in our Safe Routes to School work, we developed a tiering system in order to manage supporting 300 public and private schools. We have what we call a Tier 1 school community, and then we have all other communities on a continuous scale from equity index scores. Tier 1 support is for communities with the highest equity index scores and needs. We can support as many as 6 to 8 school communities in 2 to 3 cohorts per year with Tier 1 support. And this support is provided based on score, the interest in receiving that support, because that's important. If they don't want us, we're not going to show up. And selecting a cohort of school communities near each other in order to address needs of an entire geographic area at once, since they influence each other. But this also makes costly infrastructure engineering solutions more efficiently delivered. For example, the transportation patterns and behaviors at a high school can affect the patterns and behaviors at a nearby elementary school. Or if we have protected bike lanes planned in a neighborhood, why not include some education and encouragement programmatic support on safety using the bike lane and assess other needs, engineering, education, or encouragement while we're already there. So this diagram illustrates our Tier 1 10-step support plan that includes every step of the engagement spectrum and is designed to be inclusive and hear as close to all voices as possible while delivering a comprehensive travel plan. One thing that's really unique, you can see in step 9, we've completed a travel plan by then, and we formed community coalitions that are comprised of interested community members and school leaders in that community to discuss the infrastructure recommendations determined from the earlier engagements in steps 4 and 6. And we also discuss the recommended programmatic suggestions, and the community discusses with us which ones that they wish to adopt for their community based on their capacity and buy-in. So it's a true partnership when we deploy this 10-step process. The big picture here is shown on this map. It shows all of the school communities that requested and received Safe Routes to School support in 2019. The purple markers are high score school communities that received support usually in the form of a single or small series of interventions, and the green markers are our current Tier 1 supported communities for 2020 and the first half of 2021. The gray schools are in lower equity index scores that received support that required fewer human and financial resources in most cases. There's one error on this map where there's a gray marker in the top left that should have been marked as purple. So here's just a few examples of some higher level support within the upside down L. If you look at the picture that looks like a bridge, that's the left-hand picture in the upper right corner. That's a former North Denver Cornerstone Collaborative project, and it involved extensive engagement due to other major construction in the area. It's not a project originated by Safe Routes to School, but it does affect a school community. This bridge was recently completed and now facilitates non-motor vehicle street users to cross a wide stretch of industrial railroad tracks that were a barrier between a neighborhood and an elementary school. There were actually children walking to school who were often either 20 minutes late for class as they waited for trains to pass, and some actually crawled under the stopped trains to get to school. 100 families gained safe access to the school with the completion of this bridge, not to mention other connectivity needs that were met. The Montbello Bike Course, which is the image on the far right of this map, it's a collaborative effort between our Parks and Rec Department and Dottie, and it's actually under construction now and will be completed by July. We're planning some education and encouragement work around this, and there's a new nearby protected bike lane that's planned for the neighborhood as well. So we're going to be helping folks in the community understand how to use this bike course, how to ride safely, and take advantage of the protected bike lanes that are coming to their neighborhood. We're also providing Tier 1 support for 3 schools in Westwood, which is further down on the western part of this map. We've completed travel plans and are now forming a community coalition with about a dozen interested residents and school staff. The outreach for this coalition has been complex, with equitable engagement necessary. At first, I only had phone numbers and no email addresses. And at first, it seemed as though there were no email addresses that we had access to. And English was not the first language of some of the interested community members. So how do we reach out to those folks who are interested in engaging with us when all we have is a cell phone number and we're not sure what language to use? We finally figured it out. We also figured out a system to use text messaging that we can deliver online and have translation in place. But we did eventually get some email addresses, so we didn't have to deploy that system. But that's an illustration of how important it is to make sure you hear every voice that needs to be heard when you're doing your engagement. Before I head into questions, I just want to conclude that equity as policy is most successful when you have support from the top, and that's financial and committed support. That support must be both a formalized statement and a financial investment. In order to incorporate equity in our Safe Routes work, we need both quantitative and qualitative data to inform our output. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share, and I look forward to any questions you might have at the end of this the whole presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That was great. I really appreciate the historical context that you gave, and then like also that I guess the transference of data into equitable community engagement. So there was so much there, and yeah, the work that you all are doing is really interesting and impressive. So thanks for sharing that with us. And as Lisa mentioned, please make sure that you send us some questions. So if you have any questions for Lisa or Michelle or me at the end, we will make sure we have time to go over those as well. And I will wrap us up today by talking about school district policies. So we've talked about city and county policies. We've talked about, gave a concrete example of what an equity policy looks like in Denver. And now we'll talk about what policy looks like on the school district level. So school districts can benefit a lot from Safe Routes to School policies. We know that physical activity supports academic achievement. When children are healthier, they learn better. Physically active kids have better attendance rates, and Safe Routes to School helps children arrive safely. So oftentimes school boards are very much tied to, I guess, enacting Safe Routes to School policies and school district policies. So a large part of this work is collaborating with school boards. And so I don't know how many of you have had experiences of working with school boards, but there are lots of tips and tricks to make sure that these collaborations are successful. Just a few ideas for you as you're kind of thinking about engaging with school boards. So getting people excited about their vision for change, assessing what the problems are and what the solutions are, proposing strong policies that express the vision that you're going for, advocating, so identifying and meeting with decision makers, and then implementation, which is staying focused after the policy gets adopted. So these are just a few things to think about as you're starting to make those connections. And so, just to get started working with school boards, doing some basic research and getting the inside scoop on school board members is really important. school boards, I guess like a lot of like local government agencies, lots of different personalities and priorities and perspectives in school boards. So doing your work ahead of time and doing some research can really help you when you start to make those initial asks and make those initial connections. And then building relationships with school board members is really important. So, first you can just start by looking at, informing them about what you're trying to do and engaging them. So it could be something from, making them aware of a specific infrastructure challenge that a school is facing, to inviting them to a walk to school day or a bike to school day. But that relationship building is key. It's also important to figure out what the school board member wants. So what's important to them? Would they like to serve on a task force or a committee? And just ask them, what's important to you? What are some of the things that you would like to see changed or improved, and have that kind of be a starting point. Also, meeting with board members before presenting your ideas at a board meeting is a great idea. Just get a sense again of who you're get a sense of who you're talking to, build those relationships, start those initial conversations, and maybe test out some ideas before the formal presentation in front of the school board. Also, keeping your superintendent in the loop is always great. So whether it's the superintendent themselves or somebody else in the superintendent's office, having them engage in the process is helpful. And then also offering your resources and recognition in Safe Routes to School photo ops. So, school boards and school districts, might love some photo ops and some positive press. So, being able to offer Safe Routes to School as a platform for recognizing great work that's happening is another way to approach working with school boards. And Safe Routes to School policies can also cover a lot of different topics. So they can offer support for a specific idea or change. They can offer guidance and authorization. It can offer logistical information. And also offer information about the kind of guides, planning, and design. So I'm going to spend some time talking about these different topics as they relate to Safe Routes to School policies. So support statements, offering support for Safe Routes to School in general, maybe offering some policies that limit school restrictions. So restrictions on walking and biking, for example, those might be able to be limited through Safe Routes to School policy. And then things like student and parent handbooks, staff handbooks that might include, some Safe Routes to School policy information would be one way to approach creating a Safe Routes to School policy. Safe Routes to School policies can also offer guidance and authorization for different Safe Routes to School components. So things like walking school buses, bike trains, events like Bike and Walk to School Day, recommended travel routes, traffic education, and shared use information. All of those can be incorporated into a Safe Routes to School policy. And it kind of goes back to some of the programming information I talked about earlier, where some of these programs can help inform a strong Safe Routes to School policy. Safe Routes to School policies can also help establish formal groups, roles, and responsibilities. So things like district task forces, school teams, they can help define the duties of school and transportation departments, or establish groups like a wellness committee or a health committee. So kind of like that logistical information can also be a part of the Safe Routes to School policy. And also planning and design. So these are policies that might actually involve working with not only the school district, but also city departments like public works, city planners, engineers. And, part of this policy focus area could be school travel plans, school site design, bike parking, school siting, as Michelle just mentioned, where we put schools and why, and do we put schools in places that make sense? Do we have the proper, bike parking that supports an active biking student population? Do the school travel plans make sense, or are they the safest routes? And kind of like going back to Lisa's point about equity too, are those school travel plans equitable? And is the planning and design of a school equitable as well? So there are a few different school district policy opportunities. I just mentioned wellness policies. A lot of schools and school districts do have, like wellness committees or wellness policies embedded into, embedded into their communities, board policies, which we just talked about, and then also administrative regulations. So district policies, district wellness policies, that's something that, a lot of school districts either have or are looking into. So district policies are required, it's required by federal law for schools participating in federal student loan nutrition programs. They are historically weak on physical activity. So a district wellness policy is a great way to incorporate language about kids walking and biking. And wellness policies or traditional board policies are both effective. So we've seen, both work pretty well. And there are also some informal opportunities for, for school district safe routes to school policies. And sometimes the less formal school policies can actually be key. So things like family and student handbooks, information on websites, transportation department policies, working with, curricula, health, with health teachers or PE teachers. Other plans or policies required by the state law, like a school safety plan. Sometimes you think about safety plans and it's like, for a fire, let's say, but how can safe routes to school be incorporated into the safety plans that are already required by state law? And, as you're kind of thinking about what these informal school policies look like, also remember to actively engage students and give them decision-making power, and also actively engage people who you might not be hearing from. So like Lisa mentioned, if there's an entire group of families or students who you're not hearing from, think about why. Is it because the information that you're giving isn't in their in their primary language? Is it that you're emailing everything and they might not have an email address or might respond to text or phone better? So doing some thinking about who's at the table and who's not at the table is really important in making equitable safe routes to school policies. So to help get started on creating safe routes to school policies, we have a policy workbook, which is a free online tool that helps you review different possible policy provisions. And this allows for creation of allows for you to create a policy that's very tailored to your local needs. So it's both an educational resource and a national tool, and was a joint project between us at Safe Routes Partnership and Change Lab Solutions. So this is a nice resource to help you all out as you start thinking about putting some policies in place in your communities. So this actually came about and was developed between 2012 and 2013 with funding from CDC, and the need was seen by policy people and lawyers at Change Lab Solutions and by issue experts here at the partnership, that people kind of need more support and resources around working with safe routes to school policy. So we reviewed every district safe routes to school policy that we could find and have input from over 25 advocates, district administrators, school board members, and other experts. And so this whole resource breaks down different policies into beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And those might sound a bit arbitrary, but they're intended to give people a basic sense of what policies were more basic and good to start with. If you're just getting started working with safe routes to school policy, and then which ones are more complex or ambitious, or that might be more likely to run into a bit of resistance if you're trying to get your policy implemented. So some of the beginner policies in the workbook include things like support for active transportation, support for safe routes to school, the roles of districts, schools, students, parents, and guardians, policies around minimizing driving, following the law, creating a district task force, school teams, traffic safety education, walking school bus and bike train programs, walk and bike to school day events, student parent handbooks, and school wellness policies. So again, these are the kind of like beginner policies, so could be good ones to start exploring as you're thinking about getting some policies up and running. So some of the intermediate policies include things like like limiting restrictions on active transportation, assessing recommended routes to schools, policies around crossing guards, student arrival and dismissal, no idling policies, policies on bicycles, scooters, and skateboards on campus, policies about bike parking and storage, and also policies about like from the that relate to the student transportation department. And lastly, we have our advanced policies, which again are a bit more complex, a bit more ambitious, and might run into a bit of resistance. So policies around busing, school design, school siting, some of the zoning policies Michelle was mentioning in the beginning can kind of relate and can kind of go into some of the advanced policy, policy. So why use the policy workbook? Again, it presents a wide array of policy options for you to explore. It assists districts in committing to strong policies and helps avoid problems and liability concerns by ensuring a well thought out and well thought through and vetted approach. So I will definitely send out a link to the policy workbook at the end of the session for you all to look over and explore. Again, please feel free to reach out to us afterwards if you have other policy questions or questions about the policy workbook. And we also have a few other resources on working with school districts and getting safe routes to school into district policies, resources about building relationships with school board members and superintendents. So I can also send out those resources too in case you have questions about making those connections and building those relationships that are really important to developing strong safe routes to school policies. So that is a general overview of working with school districts. So we have about, I guess, 10-ish minutes. If there are any questions, you're welcome to pop them into the question box. And I will go ahead and unmute everyone so we can all have a conversation during the Q&A. Sorry, I'll unmute all the presenters to be clear. Okay, so questions. Someone asked, how do we access the online tool? I assume that the tool would be the policy workbook, I think, but if I'm wrong, feel free to write in the question box again. So the policy workbook is on the Safe Routes Partnership website, and I'll also send out the link after the webinar is over to make sure that you can all, so you all can take a look and start exploring that resource. But yeah, it's on our website.
I'll make a somewhat shameless plug for the policy workbook. It has, like Kori said, it has policies in the beginner, intermediate, advanced kind of categories to pull from. And it has actual policy language. So it's set up as a Word document where you can copy and paste and sort of create your own, so build it yourself policy, and then you'll go ahead and edit it. But it has that language that was really vetted by us and Change Lab Solutions, as well as the number of people who provided input.
Thanks, Michelle. Any other questions? Lisa, I actually have a question for you. I was wondering if you ran into any challenges creating the equity index, like if somebody else wanted to create this type of tool in their community, were there any sort of, I guess either something that surprised you or a challenge that might have come up in that process?
Well, I cannot take credit for the equity index score creation, but I do know, I can tell you that this started with just 5 indicators, and we had called it a community of concern score, and it was for internal use only, which you can understand calling something like that a community of concern score could have some stigmatizing associations behind it. We added some other indicators, including a number of single parent households to that score to make it more representational. But that's all I can answer to on that because I didn't create the scoring system.
Yeah, that's Good to know. Thank you. Someone else just left a comment, not necessarily a question, just about, you know, in our current situation, you know, getting programs going will be challenging with budget constraints. So if there are any resources on, you know, kind of creating policies, you know, knowing that budget constraints will be, or, you know, our concern, that would be helpful. And also sample policies for municipalities. So Michelle and I can definitely take a look and see if there are any additional resources that we have around kind of like the budgeting and funding end of policy creation, since that's on a lot of our minds right now. Any other questions before we move on to reminders and next steps? Okay. And again, you're always welcome to reach out to us afterwards, and we'll include a recording of this webinar along with all the resources and the presentation slides after we're finished. So just a few reminders for you all. Please make sure that you sign up for the Colorado Safe Routes to School newsletter. And you can email Wendy McMillan. Her address is right here on the slide. Wendy will be sending out a lot of information about the upcoming Safe Routes to School grant cycle in July, and information will be coming through this newsletter. So if you have not signed up yet and you're interested in the grant cycle, please make sure that you sign up and keep an eye out for information that'll be coming out next month. And our next webinar will be on July 15th at 11 a.m. and it will be all about Safe Routes to School action planning and sustainability, which we talked about a little bit today, but we'll go more in depth about what action planning looks like. It seems that some of you are kind of moving into that phase now, creating, you know, strategic plans and comprehensive plans. So we'll dig into that process a bit more, and also talk about, you know, how to keep your programming, how to sustain your program, and how to use action planning in order to build sustainability. Are there any other reminders or next steps that I missed? Okay. And as always, I'll be sending out a survey link as well right after the webinar. So if you could please fill out our survey, we would really appreciate it. We really value your feedback, and you help us make sure that we are delivering content that is helpful for you and useful for you. So please take a few minutes to fill out our survey, and you should be getting that shortly. And keep an eye out for the webinar recording and our resources, resource links, and the presentation slides. And here's my contact information along with Michelle's contact information, and we'll also send out Lisa's contact information in a follow-up email if you have any other questions. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We hope to see you all next time. So July 15th at 11 a.m. and we'll be talking all about Safe Routes to School, action planning, and sustainability. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will be in touch with the resource links and the recording and the survey pretty shortly. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.